I step off the private elevator on the 40th floor of one financial plaza in my new shoes. New shoes, ridiculous, bright red, 3-inch stilettos. What was I thinking? Oh yeah, Everest. Maybe the best restaurant in Chicago, one of the 30 or 40 best in the US. As I passed the store window, the shoes lured me in. My willpower collapsed like a condemned building. This was so not me. I've only had them a minute and they're cheese graters for feet. The quick roll of my ankle on the slick granite floor reminds me why I don't wear high heels. My arms splay and rotate like a windmill. The shopping bag that holds my serviceable shoes and my small evening bag spins off my wrist. One shoe skids away. Crap, crap, crap. I'm going to stop there. This is the first chapter of At First Sight by Sharon Michalove. Welcome, Sharon, to Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews. And it's so great to talk to you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm very excited.
Yeah.
And I forget how much I worked over that opening.
Love it.
Don't kill me, people. I know Everest is closed, but they were open in 2013 when this book takes place.
Right. Well, but you know what shines in there is that your humor, your sense of humor is sprinkled throughout this book like awesome seasoning. I love it.
Thank you. I spent years having people tell me I had no sense of humor.
Not true. Not true. So At First Sight is a romantic suspense novel in the beginning of a series of the Global Security Unlimited 1 series. Can you talk about the characters in this series? Because they're a little bit older, and which for me was great because they seem so much more real and more secure in their desires and more just interesting to read. So tell us about Cress Taylor and Max Grant and how they first meet.
Okay, so Cress Taylor actually celebrates her 46th birthday in this book, and Max is 40. 20 years before the book starts, they're both students at Oxford University. He's a senior, just finishing up in languages. He's really a language person. And she has just arrived from Chicago as a new doctoral candidate. And so Oxford is all new to her. And she's late for meeting her tutor for the first time. And she borrows a bicycle from her roommate. Her roommate is very tall and Cress is very short. And so this bicycle does not fit her well. She's driving down the road and Max and his cousin are walking along and paying no attention. And she runs into him and knocks him down, which she needs a big heavy bike to do that because he's also very tall. He's about 6'5" and she's 5'2". And in their little exchange for the next few minutes, she's got these mesmerizing eyes and he's just smitten. And she just wants to escape, which is what she eventually does. She's incredibly embarrassed. And over the years, he can't quite get her out of his mind. They see each other at a distance that year in Oxford. And eventually he decides he's going to be brave and go up and ask her out. And she's with somebody else. So he realizes his time has passed. 20 years later, they're both in Chicago. She's gone back to Chicago and she's a successful writer of historical fiction. It's what she does with her doctorate in history. She writes historical fiction. And he has been an MI6 agent for most of this time. And he's now retired and because of some bad experiences. And he's gone to work for a cybersecurity company in Chicago. And he's been there about 6 years. He sees her on TV while he's working out in the home gym of his boss, which is on the top floor of a big skyscraper building in Chicago, a very fancy place. And they've got the TV on and she's being interviewed for a book that she had come out that she's going to be signing at a bookstore.
Yeah. So that their first meeting was the bicycle rack. And then 20 years later, how do they meet again?
Oh, okay. So he sees her on TV and this book signing in this bookstore, which is a real bookstore, not too far from me. Um, and he decides he's going to go and see whether he feels the same spark he felt 20 years before. And so he shows up at the book signing, and she's not thrilled that this person has approached her who wants more than just a signed book, and B, that he's bringing up this episode from her past that she was incredibly embarrassed about. And he asks her out afterwards. He asks her if she wants to go out afterwards, and her friends are there. And so she's going out to dinner with her friends, and he invites himself along.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's so cute that they both remember the first meeting, and neither one of them was had a relationship or got married, and not that they were pining for each other or anything like that. But then when they met again, it was maybe a little bit of sparks.
He definitely feels a spark.
He had the sparks.
And
she was
feels a
dubious.
spark, but she's not sure she wants to feel a spark at that point.
Yeah.
She had the one relationship with the guy that she was with at Oxford, and he hasn't had a relationship with anybody because he's a spy. He keeps secrets, and
Right.
and it makes it very difficult for him. He can't open up to people, really. The only people who know anything about his background is besides the company he works for, because you can't keep that secret.
Well, since you brought him up, though, you said he's ex MI6.
Yes.
And he's Scottish, right?
Yes, he's
So
Scottish. Mhm.
tell us what kind of research did you have to do for this?
For MI6, I knew quite a bit just because there's all these spy shows out there. And I'm interested. I've read a lot of John le Carré and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the research I did on that was, what kinds of relationships do spies have with their families? How often do they get divorced? What kind of educational background do they have, and that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons I decided to have him do languages, because languages are perfect for that kind of stuff. And the cybersecurity stuff comes when he stops being a field agent and they send him to Oxford for a doctorate, but that's later in his career. That's after all that beginning stuff.
Mhm.
The Scottish part, I did a lot of research because I needed to know all kinds of stuff about his family, and I needed to know like sports, like he's interested in rugby. I didn't know anything about rugby.
And cars.
Yeah, well, okay, so this is a funny story. So one of the things I do is, if I'm kind of stuck on character traits for my characters, I ask them what they're interested in. So two things happened. One was, I was looking out the window one day and I saw this weird little car. It's a 3-wheeled car and it looks kind of like a bug. So I had to go look that up because I had no idea what it was. And don't ask me to tell you what it is because I never can remember the name. But anyway, I thought, wouldn't that be a cute car for somebody to use tooling around the city? Because it's only a 3-wheel car. And then I didn't go anywhere with that at the time. And so then I'm sitting there one day and I said, okay, Max, what do you like? Besides rugby and computers and languages, what else do you like? And it's like, cars. And I'm like, when I was driving, I don't have a car now. I always bought compacts or subcompacts. My husband was cool with this because neither of us like to drive. And then we would drive them into the ground. So most of our cars lasted about 15 years and we'd trade them with about 80,000 miles. Yeah. Which is not much for 15 years.
Right.
And so I'm like, well, what kind of cars? Oh, high-end sports cars. So then I'm like, okay, so what do I do now?
Right.
And so I'm a knitter, and that may seem like a non sequitur, but twice I went up to northern Michigan to Petoskey for knitting retreats. And I met a woman up there named Merritt Scott Collins, who's a teaches communications at Wayne State University and knits. She's an amazing knitter. In her spare time, she is a race car driver. Oh. So yeah, yes, she's got a team. Her husband, who also drives, is a mechanic. Yeah, it's the whole deal. I mean, they do all the racing for the whole racing season. And so I sent her a message on Messenger and said, so Merritt, I have this character and he likes cars. I know nothing about cars. So she sends me all this stuff. I mean, we have this back and forth. She tells me how you get your cars to the track, how you take care of these cars, all this kind of, yeah, all these things. And then I said, well, where would he drive? And it doesn't appear in the book, but she goes, oh, for where you are, Road America. It's one of the premier places in the country. It's in Wisconsin. So I do all this stuff. I read up on all these things and construct, because I've got this one kind of long scene where he talks to this other guy about cars.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, but what do guys talk about when they talk about cars? I don't talk about cars. My husband is no longer around, but if he was still alive, he didn't talk about cars either. So I contacted my middle brother because he had rebuilt a car with my nephew. I thought he must like cars because why would he do this? So I said to him, well, so what do guys talk about? So he sends me a list of things that they talk about, everything from sound system to, 0 to 120 or whatever. Okay, so I do that. And then I go back to him because Max wants a new car, and because he collects cars. And so I contact my brother and I say, if money was no object, if you could buy any car, what would you buy? And what do I get back from him? Well, I'm not really interested in cars, and I usually just buy a car and drive it into the ground for 15 years. Like he rebuilt the car because my nephew was interested in cars.
Oh no.
The bonding thing wasn't anything else. So I'm like, well, this is no help. So he said, just ask Ben, who's the younger of his two sons, because he's crazy about cars. So I send him a message, and he's 23 years old, and I say, so Ben, if you could buy any car, what would you buy? I'd buy a Dodge Charger. And I'm like, why? So he explains to me it's the classic American muscle car, and he would just buy the newest iteration of it. And I thought, well, this doesn't help me at all. So then I went looking for possible cars that Max would buy, and that's why I picked the one that I did, which was just a prototype at the time of the book. And his father would have gone and seen it. He would have gone down to Scion Park in London and seen the car. So that's what I used. And then for the other guy, who's a friend of Cress's that he's trying to get to know better, he chooses the Dodge Charger because he's a NASCAR guy, not a Formula One guy.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's why he would want that particular car, and I gave him that exact reason why he would want that car. And then the end of the scene, the whole scene is set up for Max to try and figure out what car he would impress Cress with.
That's funny.
Last thing is that he says also, which of my cars should I take her out in? Because I really want to impress her. And her friend looks at him and says, ride the bus with her. She'd appreciate that a lot more, because she doesn't know how to drive. She doesn't care about cars at all.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a huge dichotomy.
I thought that was really funny, actually.
Yeah. The spoiler in the second book is they're up in Scotland, and he does teach her how to drive. But her driving experience, learning how to drive, because it's all stick, because most Brits like to drive stick shift, and that's what they've got. Her experience with trying to learn stick shift was my experience in high school, unsuccessfully trying to learn stick shift. So,
it's hard.
Well, I never did. I mean, eventually my instructor got tired of me stalling the car out in front of the high school, all in this one day. It's the only day we did it. And he made me switch places, and he drove it into the parking lot because we would have been there forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Cress.
Mm-hmm.
You said she's an author of historical fiction.
Yes.
And then she starts getting these anonymous threats that she's plagiarized and all of this.
Yeah. So when Max shows up, she's just started getting these threats. And one of the things she wonders when this guy suddenly appears out of her past, is whether he's the person.
Right.
She doesn't know why he would be the person, but she doesn't know why anybody's doing this for her. Now, I have to say, for a suspense book, fairly early on who the person is who's sending it. But there are a bunch of little kind of shadowy things before that.
But it still, it escalates, and what
Right.
happens to her keeps escalating. And
Right. So it's partially what this person moves on to after the fake news, because the first part is really all a fake news construct thing that snowballs. But when that's not getting the person who's threatening her what she wants, then she moves on to more threatening things. And I
right,
won't say what those are,
right,
but you wonder, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen
right.
next.
How bad is it going to get? Yeah,
Right. And it gets pretty bad.
it does.
Nobody dies in the book,
No,
because it's not a murder book, but it
I would
gets.
tell you, I was really, really worried about the cats.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And the cats are fine. I'll just say that the cats were fine. Nothing happened to the
No,
cats.
no animal,
But
no
there was a
animals were
point where I was really, really worried. I wasn't sure where the cats were, and I was really, really concerned for them.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah,
As long as nothing actually happens to them. But
right.
but but yeah, I have two cats, and essentially my cats, Sybil and Nico are the models for Dorothy and Thorfinn.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun with names in this book, and why
Yeah.
people have the names they do, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was kind of fun, and some of the language play is fun for me.
Yeah.
I
And
did
I
have,
think it's fun to read.
yeah.
So
I
yeah.
find that the French and the Italian don't bother people. In the second book, I was going to use Russian and Turkish as well, and I ended up just indicating people were speaking in those languages and used the English because they're so much less familiar as non-romance languages that I found my early readers were not as happy with that as they were with the.
Yeah, I think a little bit sprinkled here and there is probably okay as long as you're translating it right away.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I have one place where I do use a little bit of Russian because Max's mother's family is Russian. So he's got this, his father's very Scottish, and his mother, even though she grew up in Scotland, because of this Russian influence, they all speak Russian. So the kids are all trilingual, because they speak Gaelic and they speak Russian and they speak English.
right.
All of them. And he's got four siblings. He's got two older siblings and two younger siblings, so he is the true middle child.
Yeah. So writing romantic suspense is particularly difficult because not only do you have the romantic arc, right, but you also have the suspense arc. And these two arcs have to weave together,
Mhm.
and the outcome has to end,
Yeah,
together.
well, they don't really.
Well, ish.
You have to wind up one before the other. So I have a
Right.
friend who also writes romantic suspense, and she winds up the romance first and the suspense at the very end. And I did just the opposite.
I did the opposite in mine too.
Yeah. I decided that I really wanted this big family Christmas thing at the end. And one reason is because Cress has a terrible family background, and she essentially has no real family at this point. And Max has this huge, very boisterous family, and they all descend on Chicago.
Yeah. Wearing
So
kilts.
wearing kilts. Yes. I particularly liked the way I resolved the dark moment, because in a way they both have to do kind of the grand gesture at the end, because they're both kind of in the wrong. And I felt that wasn't going to work until all of the suspense stuff was wrapped up. Because if you had all this and then you still had the suspense things hanging on, then that would be kind of
Right. Now, I think that
it didn't
gets,
work for
I
me.
feel like you have to me, it seems like this suspense needs to get resolved first and then the relationship issues. Although when you go into book two, you know that the relationship is pretty steady.
Yeah,
Although
because
there may be some conflict, or there has to be a little bit.
well, it's funny because the second book wasn't supposed to be about them,
Mm,
but I felt that one of the things in his background hadn't really been resolved. But the other thing about writing older characters is the older we get, the harder it is for us to change. And we can say that we want to change, and we may really want to change, but we backslide a lot. And so one of the problems in the second book is the backsliding, because he's not supposed to be keeping secrets anymore. And yet he comes up with reasons for himself why he's not telling her things. And she gets extremely angry. And that's because, and then she realizes that she's overreacting.
Yeah,
So,
but it's also, that's so ingrained in his, you know.
right. Yeah. So there's still points of tension as you go along, but then there's a big the subplot in that book is really all about them being chased by terrorists. And so that takes up a lot of stuff, but also they spend a bunch of time in London and Scotland, and that's more of her trying to get used to the fact that this family loves her, and she's not sure exactly what to do with that, or whether she can trust that that's going to remain a thing. So yeah, so they'll show up in other books in the series, but they won't be the main focus after this. And the third book is about Mickey and JL, and they're kind of important secondary characters in both of the first two books. And she's American, she's Cress's friend. They grew up together, and JL is one of Max's co-workers, and he's French Canadian.
Yeah, I like that. That's an interesting way to continue the series, by just focusing on different characters.
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
So there's a thing in the first book that leads into the problem in the third book. So I'm all about kind of connecting these things in different ways. There were supposed to be two subplots in the first book, because I had a subplot for her, and then I had a subplot for him, but I could never bring those two together. And if you're going to have more than one, they have to intertwine at some point. And the way I made that happen in the first draft was very, very clunky. And in the end, I decided that her pursuing her problems worked because he would be involved, because he works for a security company and she's being threatened. So there's his own personal interest, but there's also all the other stuff that his company can do for her. So she's got bodyguards, not one of her favorite things, for example.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of similarities between your book and my romantic suspense book, which I publish under a pseudonym. There's bodyguards and the wealthy boyfriend, love interest.
Although I really try not to. It's obvious that he has money and that the family has money, but it's not like one of those things
billionaire romance.
I'm a billionaire guy. It's just kind of.
No, it's not that at all. And that's another thing that I liked about it, because he was like a real person.
I like to think he is. I mean, so I should say I started writing. I mean, I'd always written, and I'm a historian, so I'd published in history, not surprising. But after my husband died, I started reading romance, and I was always a mystery reader. I didn't read much romance. And it's very lonely living alone when you've lived with somebody for almost 40 years. And so essentially Max was like one of my ideal guys. I was writing my book boyfriends. And so that's kind of what happened with him. And he's got two things in common with my late husband. One is that he's a language guy. And my husband was definitely a language guy. He knew a whole lots about languages. And he even taught classical Mongolian, which is the 17th century version of Mongolian. Yeah. And the other thing is that my husband absolutely loved bad jokes. And Max absolutely loves bad jokes. And there are bad jokes scattered all the way through the book. And Cress never laughs, and I never laughed. And that was the big thing, was, could he make me laugh at these jokes? And even if I thought they were funny, I wouldn't laugh.
Right.
So little bits of people creep in to the books, but people ask me how much of it is imagined, and really all of it's imagined.
Well, yeah.
I don't have a horrible family. I didn't, any of that kind of stuff. But that's the whole point of being a writer, is you can imagine worlds that aren't your own.
Right. And people that aren't, people that but maybe there are traits of people that that end up in a character, whether consciously or not. I think it's just how our minds work, and
right. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's nice, because when you're alone most of the time, and certainly during COVID, I was alone a lot. Um, your characters talk to you, and your characters tell you, kind of what they want, because I wouldn't have written about cars. But Max was very insistent about that. And the book that I've got coming out in August, my characters wanted it to be in Northern Michigan. And I'm like, I don't know anything about Northern Michigan. I've been writing about places I know. Chicago, London, Highlands of Scotland, Paris, places like that I know pretty well.
Right.
So you want to talk about doing a lot of research.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Printing out maps, town maps, and all this kind of stuff. The Chicago stuff, except for one restaurant, all those Chicago restaurants either exist or did exist at one time.
So Sharon, what are you working on now? What can readers expect from you next?
Okay, so August 10th is Dead in the Alley, which is a traditional mystery with a romance, because I can't seem to write without romance. And it takes place in kind of the cherry growing area of Northern Michigan. So for people who don't know, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is not Northern Michigan. Northern Michigan is the top part of the lower part of Michigan. And that's where it takes place. And then I've just started writing the first, and what I'm hoping is going to be a cozy mystery series that's going to take place in Jane Austen country. So Hampshire, England, in a town that's created village that's between Winchester and the coast and Southampton. And I've had to do a lot of research for that, but my high concept for it that everybody seems to like is Jane Austen meets Agatha Christie in a modern English village. And it's called, the first one's going to be called Murder at the Great Jane Austen Cook-Off.
Oh, wow.
That's I'm hoping that'll be done for next year. But this will make this one, and At the Crossroads, which is the second in the Global Security Unlimited series, will both be this year's publication. So the second Max and Cress came out in May for my celebrating what would have been my 47th anniversary. The first book came out on my 70th birthday. This one's coming out on August 10th, and the date has no meaning. It wasn't for any particular reason. But anyway, it's kind of like, I don't know, sometime in August, and I just somehow picked that date.
Yeah. Tell readers where they can find you if they want to get in touch.
Right. So where they can find me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I have a website. It's www.SharonMichalove, hard to spell, I know, I'm sorry, .com. And everything is on there. I have a newsletter, and I do blog posts every week, except for the last 5 weeks or so. I haven't done one. I did come out with a new newsletter today, and I'll probably post it up there for people who don't have it, because I have I'm asking people to write me if they want. I've got 2 copies of the e-arc for Dead in the Alley coming out. Mm-hmm. At the Crossroads will be free on Amazon, the ebook version, from the 8th to the 10th of July.
Okay.
So if anybody's interested, but also the ebooks will all be in KU. So
great.
Out, and the new one will be also in KU. So.
Cool. And you're on Facebook and Instagram?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I have an account on TikTok, but I somehow every time I think, well, maybe I should try and make some video, I end up going, I'd rather write. So I just go back to writing instead. And am I on anything else? Pinterest, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking with me today.
Well, thank you. It was great to be here, and you didn't have to shut me out too often.
No, I love it. And I'm sure everyone's going to love it. So.
Well, fingers crossed.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.